Hi students, in this session we are going to talk about a new chapter. We are going to start a new chapter, that is adaptation. We will talk about how adaptation is important for the survival of different organisms. What are the different features that are important for the survival of different kinds of habitats. We will talk about what exactly is a habitat, and we will define the different changes that we see in the organisms in different areas. So let's start with the term adaptation. What do we mean by adaptation, right? So we know that different organisms living in different areas have different kinds of external features. Like for example, if we talk about people living in India and the people that are living in Africa have different kinds of external feature. The people in Africa are comparatively having darker complexion, and the hair features are also different. Apart from this, they are more stout, they are taller as compared to the Indians, and various other external features are there which help us in distinguishing between the two races. So we see that how different organisms, organisms have adapted themselves according to their own environment, according to their own, you can say the habitat that they are living in, right? So what exactly is adaptation? Let's understand. The presence of features which enable a plant or an animal to live and survive in its surroundings is called as the adaptation. The features which are enabling the plant or the animal, that is a living organism, to live successfully, to thrive in a particular environment is known as the adaptation. They can be various ways. For example, if we talk about the deserts, so we have seen the plants which are there are cactus, right? So these cactus are green in color, the stem is green in color, and the leaves are shrunk into the spines or thorns in such a way that they do not lose water, right? So we see that there are so many different kinds of changes that a particular plant, this particular plant has undertaken to survive in the hot environment and in the scarcity of water. Apart from that, we see animals like camel which can go up to 10 days without drinking water or having food. We've seen different kinds of adaptation in the camel also. We will discuss about all this in detail. Like for example, another example that we have taken is, and say a water lily or a lotus. We see that the plant which is living in the aquatic system has developed different kinds of you can say features. For example, the plant has a waxy coating on the leaf so that because of excess water the leaf do not decompose. So we see how this particular environment is because of the changes in the environment, a particular organism has adapted itself, be it your animal, be it your plant. So we've seen how different kinds of features are present in different kinds of animals which help them in surviving that particular type of habitat. So there are, like I've said, there are different kinds of modifications which occur in a particular environment and in a particular animal, and this change occurs say over the period of time as and when the environment is changing. So what is adaptation again? Adaptation is the presence of features which enable a particular organism to survive in a type of habitat, in a particular type of environment. So that's how, if we see a particular organism or plant, by looking at the features, at the modifications it has, we can to an extent identify the kind of habitat they are living in, right? So in this way we can define adaptation as the presence of feature which enable a plant or an animal to live and survive in its surrounding, right? I hope you were able to understand the definition and the importance of adaptation. Hi students, in this session we are going to talk about habitat and the different adaptations a particular organism have according to their habitat. First, let's understand what the term habitat means. The term habitat is the place where an organism is living, right? That is the area where a person this is a place where an organism is living. It can be any kind of, we know that our earth has different kinds of environment, or overall it has cold, very cold environment, it has really hot environment, there are different kinds of forest and so on and so forth. So a place where an organism is found or stays or lives is known as its habitat, right? So like I've said, there are different kinds of habitat in our environment. There are land, and in land we have forests, we have desert, right? We have desert, we have cold environments, so on and so forth. Then we have aquatic. In aquatic again we have marine, that is the sea. Then we have your fresh water, and then we have your air. Correct? In air we have different kinds of birds that are living. So the place where an organism is living is known as, or it is found in nature, is known as its habitat. Now organisms exist in different kinds of habitat with the help of different kinds of adaptations that they have undertaken for living in that particular environment, right? So if any organism is living in water, so it has different kinds of adaptation which will allow that organism to thrive in the aquatic or in the water. For example, if you are talking about fish, we see that for moving forward in the water they have tail, they have fins, for respiring they have gills. So we see how a particular organism has changed its body features to live in the particular environment they are in. We know that we can take different kinds of examples to understand this particular type of features, this phenomena or this particular term known as the habitat. So organisms which exist in desert, the organisms which exist in mountains, and the organisms which thrive on the trees have different kinds of changes in their body. For example, if we talk about giraffes, we know that giraffes are present in the forest and they eat from the trees. So they will not be found in the grasslands, right? They will be found in the forest where there are ample amount of trees, and that's how we know a giraffe has adapted itself to stay in the forest where there are trees. Because of the long neck, it can feed from the trees, whereas the deer, for that matter, stays in the grassland where it feeds on the grass which is present on the ground. So we see how animals have different kind of adaptations according to their habitat, according to the place or the area where they are living. Now let's understand that we know that not only animals but plants also adapt themselves according to their environment. Like in the previous session we talked about cactus. We see that in cactus the stem is fleshy, it is green, right? The stem is green and fleshy. What is happening because of that? It can perform photosynthesis, right? It can perform photosynthesis, it stores water, and cactus has adapted itself according to the dry and hot environment it is found in. Similarly, if we see in camel can also survive in the desert because of the ability of it to go without water for more than 10 days, right? So it has the ability to stay in such dry and hot environment. Similarly, like we have talked about the water plants, for example, like your hyacinth, water hyacinth, then your water lily, lotus, all these have their waxy cuticle, waxy covering on the leaf and on the plant so that they do not decompose. Then there are various other features which have developed over time which allows them to stay in the aquatic conditions. Also we see there are certain kinds of birds like your duck which has developed webbed feet to swim onto the water, right? So their feet are webbed, that means between their toes they have a film of skin which allows them to move forward in the water, correct? So we see how there are different ways in which a particular organism has adapted itself to survive in the environment. Now let's take an example. For example, if we are talking about the bird known as sparrow. Now that sparrow is usually found in the areas where there is human population, in your towns, in your villages. Why? Because these sparrows are used you will not find them in thick forest area. You will find them in areas where there are people, because these sparrows feed on the scrape food or the waste food that we are throwing away or which falls down, right? So they suppose if you are throwing away rice, so these sparrows go and feed on those rice, on the rice, right? So in this way we see that different animals, like for example if we talk about squirrels. Now squirrels have bushy tail, right? You see there are bushy tail and they have curved claws. These are curved claws because they stay where? They stay in the tree. So that's why for maintaining the grip onto the tree they have curved claws and they jump from one tree to another. You will, because of that, to maintain balance they have a bushy tail, right? So because their survival is on the tree, so they have adapted themselves according to the survival in the tree. Then if you see yak, again this animal has adapted itself for living in the cold environment. You can see how furry it is because it saves, these furs save it from the cold. Then if you talk about mole, this mole lives in the soil inside the ground, and if you see it has a paws like of a the spade like paws, right? So it has spade like paws to what it does, it digs the ground to move around. So it has spade like paws to remove this ground in front, the soil in front of it, and then it moves forward. Then you have your earthworms. Again they are living inside the ground and they do not have so much of they basically wriggle around in the ground. So you see that how different kinds of organisms have different kinds of features in them for according to the habitat or according to the area they are living in. Not only in animals, we see different kinds of adaptation or different kinds of you can say the modifications in the plants as well. Like for example, we have talked about cactus, we have talked about different you can say the water plants. Then you have a plant known as the buttercup. This particular plant lives or thrives on the damp grass, damp area where it can get enough of sunlight and enough of water. Then you have another kind of plants known as the ferns and moss. This is the plant which needs lots of water and it is usually spotted in the moist area, maybe near the pond, maybe near lake or rivers. So we see how different plants have also adopted themselves according to the environment and have created various modifications in them according to the habitat they are living in. You can also go outside and spot different kinds of animals and plants and note down the different changes that you see, right? For example, go to the lake and see what kind of plants are there. What is the difference between those plants and the plants, say, that are on the land? So suppose you take a lotus, you check what are the features of a lotus, and then you go and check the features of a rose. You will find different features which are absolutely different. They have a stark difference between them because of the habitat they are living in, right? So I hope you were able to understand the concept of habitat and how it is important in changing a particular kind of organism so that it can live in the particular habitat. We are going to talk about the different types of organism based on their habitats. Now we know on earth we have basic two types of habitats, and definitely there are different kinds of organisms also. So the basic two types of habitats that we have is your terrestrial, first of all, and then you have your aquatic habitats. The animals or the organisms which are living on the terrestrial habitat are known as your terrestrial animals or terrestrial plants, whereas the animals or plants which are living in the aquatic environment are known as the aquatic animals or aquatic plants. So in terrestrial we have different kinds of habitats again. So in terrestrial we have your deserts, right? We have forests. Then you have your grasslands and so on and so forth. In the same way, in aquatic habitats we have oceans, we have rivers, ponds, lakes, etc. So we see how there are basic two types of habitats. One is terrestrial, the other is your aquatic, and further we see how the terrestrial as well as the aquatic these habitats are divided. So now let's understand the different types of plants which are present on the basis of their habitat. So what are the different types of plants on the basis of habitat? The first one is known as your hydrophytes. As the name suggests, hydro and phyte it stands for plant. So hydro means water. So these are the plants which are living in the water. They have the adaptations which help them in surviving in the water. They can be submerged completely, or they can be some part of it can be seen above the water. So for example, you have your lotus, right? Then you have your water lily. You have singhara. This you all know that singhara is a kind of a fruit that we are eating. It is also known as the water chestnut. So we can write down it as singhara for your better understanding, right? So these are the different kind of plants that we see in the aquatic system. They can be submerged completely, or they can be, like for example, the submerged completely plant that we usually see is hydrilla, whereas some part of the plant can be above the water. For example, lotus, we can see the leaves, some of the leaves and the flower above the plant, above the surface of the water, right? So in this way we have a plants which are hydrophytes, that means they are the aquatic plants. Then you have your mesophytes. These are again your terrestrial plants which live on the land. So plants which are living on land with sufficient water, that means there is enough rainfall, they are provided with enough water for their survival. You will see that they are very different from the plants which are present in the desert, right? They have proper leaves, they have proper root system, they have proper stem. So you see that these are the plants which are living on land. The example being your neem, right? Mango, right? You have ashoka, so on and so forth. You see different kind of plants which are there present on the land, which are have access to the sufficient amount of water. These are known as your terrestrial plants. These are present on the land. Then again you have your xerophytic plants. These are the xerophytes are the ones which are present in the dry climate having scarcity of water. That means water is not present or they have less amount of water. Basically they are found in your deserts, right? So they have in dry climate, they are present in the dry climate and they have scarcity of water. The example being cactus, and you have seen that how cactus is so different from say neem or say rose, right? So it has fleshy stem, it has green stem, right? And there are different kinds of changes that you see in this plant. Then you have babool. This again is a plant which is found in the dry climate. Then again you have acacia and so on. There are different kinds of plants which are present in the xerophytic environment, right? So these are the plants which are known as the xerophytes. These again are terrestrial. Both of these are terrestrial and this is an aquatic plant. So you have hydrophytes based on the climate, based on the habitat. You have mesophytes and then you have xerophytes. Moving on, let's classify different animals on the basis of their habitats. First again is aquatic, the plants or the animals which are living in the water. These are your fishes, right? These are your say octopus, right? So there are so many different kinds of animals which are living in the water. They again have the modifications or adaptations according to the survival in the water. So fishes have say gills for respiration, right? And so on and so forth. So we see how the different organisms have adapted themselves according to the environment they are in. Then you have your terrestrial animals, that means the animals which are living on the land. That can be say your lion, it can be cat and dog and so many other animals that we see around us. Then you have your say you can say cow, right? So all these animals are living on the land and they gain their food and they thrive on the land, right? So they have the adaptations according to the terrestrial environment. Then you have amphibious. These are the animals which live both on water as well as in the both in the water and on the land. So the example being frog, your salamander, right? All these. So all these organisms are living both in land and water. Why they are known as that is the reason why they are known as amphibious. That means they cannot complete their life cycle without water. So some part of the life they spend on land and some part of the life they spend in the water, right? For example, if we take the example of frog, so the frog gives birth to, or they lay eggs, and the eggs hatch into tadpoles, right? And these tadpoles are completely aquatic, right? These tadpoles stay in water until they develop into the form of the adult frog. So we see how it is dependent on the water to complete its life cycle, and these kind of animals are known as your amphibious. Then you have arboreal. These are the animals which are living on the trees. They survive on the trees, that the example being squirrel, and different kind of monkeys, right? So they attain their food, they get their food from the trees, they survive on the trees by making nest, and so on and so forth. So these are your arboreal animals which are living on the trees, which are dependent on the trees for their survival. They have also developed different features which allow them to live on the trees. For example, I have taken the example of squirrel in the previous sessions, that they have curved claws which give them a better grip. In the same case, we have monkeys which have a hand like ours, so that they can hold on to the branches properly. Then the tail which provides them balance. So we see that how different animals are there, what are the different kinds of animals, basing them on their habitats. We are going to talk about the adaptations that are taken up by the plants for survival in the aquatic habitat. Basing on the types of plants that we have in the aquatic habitat, we have classified them in three ways. One is the floating, other is the submerged, and the third type is fixed plants. Let's understand about all these three types. First, let's understand about the floating plants. Now, as the name suggests, floating plants are the plants which are floating about in the aquatic environment. These are the plants like your water lily, right? You have your lotus in this category. Then you have water hyacinth, right? So you have different kinds of plants which are seen floating. So some of the part of these plants are under the water. Now this is the water, and some of the part is under the water, and some of it is above the water. Now this is an example of your water lily, right? So you can see that these plants have different kinds of adaptations which are present in their root system, in their stem, and in their leaves. So let's understand what are the adaptations that these plants have undergone so as to survive in the environment of the water. These plants are usually found in your fresh water, say in the rivers, in the lakes. Usually these plants are not found in the rivers because rivers are flowing, right? So what happens is that because they are floating plants, so it is not healthy for them to survive in these kind of plants, in this kind of environment. So where are they usually found? They are found in lakes, they are found in ponds, right? So let's understand what are the different kinds of adaptations, or what are the different features which have allowed these plants to stay in the aquatic system. So these are the floating plants which are not fixed to the soil. So because they are not fixed to the soil, so their root and root hairs are poorly developed, right? So we know the function of root is, there are two basic functions of root. One is the is that they attain water and mineral from the soil, and other is the fixation of plant. But because these plants are floating, so they do not need root to fix them to the soil. Apart from that, because they are present in the water, so they do not need root to get the water or conduct the water from the soil. So root and root hairs are poorly developed in this kind of plant. Then you have stem. These are thin and flexible. Why they are thin and flexible? As you can see, these are very thin and flexible because if they are really hard, these plants will not be able to float, and because of the water current, it can break. So what will happen if these stem is thin and flexible? It can sway according to the water current and it can bend, right? So this is the reason why the stem is seen to be thin and it is seen to be flexible. Then apart from that, leaves are are large and circular and keep floating on the surface, right? As you can see, these are the leaves, these are large and they are circular, right? Because they are on the surface, that's why they are usually large, right? We will see how these leaves are different from the leaves which are there in the submerged plant. So apart from that, the leaves are covered with the waxy cuticle. Why the waxy cuticle is important? Because this will help the plant in or rather I should say this will protect the plant from decomposition, right? Because it is present constantly in the water, then what will happen? The water will eventually decompose the plant, but because of the waxy cuticle, because of the waxy covering onto the leaves and the stem, the plant survives in the water, right? So a lot of water does not you can say hamper the plant in any way. Moving on, let's understand other type of plants that are submerged plants. Now these plants are the ones which are present in the water. They are inside the water. You will not be able to see these plants above the water. The example being hydrilla, right? Hydrilla is one of the basic examples of your the plant which is submerged. Now if you see the difference between the two, it has a root which fixes it to the ground, right? These are the plants which these are underwater and these plants are rooted in the ground, right? So these are rooted in the soil. Now if you observe, this is the basic difference from the floating one. In the floating they were not fixed to the soil and hence they were floating, whereas in the submerged plant you see they are rooted in the soil. Then apart from that, if you look at the leaves are not flat, they are not round, they are not big. So the leaves are long and thin. Why they are long and thin? Because they are present in the water, and so that the pressure of the water does not tear up the leaves, it is very important for them to be long and thin. So what happens? Because they are long and they are thin, the water passes right through it. So if they were like say large and they were circular, if they had large surface area, the water would tear up these leaves. So it is one of the adaptations which is present in the plant hydrilla, which is an example of a submerged plant, that the leaves are thin and they are very you can say long, right? So because of that, what happens is the water current does not harm the plant. So these are the adaptations of the submerged plant. Then you have your fixed plant. These are the plants which might be in the water or they usually are present on the surface. The example being buttercup. This is the plant which needs water for the survival. This again is a fixed plant, that is the root is fixed to the ground and they are not completely submerged into the water, right? For example, in submerged, how these two plants are different, you can say that ma'am, the fixed plant also is rooted into the soil, but the difference is this plant was completely submerged. You will not be able to see any part of the plant onto the surface of the aquatic system, but over here you will find that the plant is you can say the plant has some part of it above the ground. So the example is buttercup. As you can see in the picture, the root part is not visible because it is fixed into the ground or into the soil which is present underwater, and rest of the part is above the ground. So you see how there are different kinds of plants which are present in the aquatic system also. So if there is so much variety of plants and organisms which are present in one particular type of environment as well. So in one habitat you might find the lotus, you will also find the hydrilla there, right? So you can see how they are so much different from one another. Also you can see how one plant differs from the other plant depending on where they are present. Then there is one other you can say adaptation which we need to study about, that is the adaptation in frogs. We know that frogs are amphibian, so they are adapted to live on in both water as well as on the land. So what are the different adaptations we see that are present in the frog? First of all, they have lungs, right? They have lungs for their respiration. We know the terrestrial animals have lungs which breathe the air, or rather they survive on the land, right? So they have lungs for respiration which helps them in respiration on the land. Then apart from that, for respiration in the water, they have moist skin, right? This moist skin helps in the exchange of gases. That means oxygen will be taken in and carbon dioxide will be lost out because of the moist skin, which helps in the process of respiration. So you see, this is for land and this is for water. So we see how the frog is adapted for surviving or respiring both on the land as well as in the water. Then again, they have webbed feet, right? The feet are webbed for your aquatic environment, right, for the water, so that they can swim in the water. Apart from that, they have feet which help them in leaping. So what they have are the strong back leg, right? So they have strong back leg which helps them in jumping, right? They help them in jumping. So this particular feature is for the land, right? So we see how the frog is also adapted for both survival in the water as well as on the land. So we see how respiration is possible both in land and water, how locomotion is possible. Webbed feet help them in swimming, whereas the strong back leg help them in leaping or jumping on the land, right? So we see there are so many adaptations that we have seen in the organism, which is in the organism which is living in the aquatic system, whether it is a plant or whether it is the frog, right? So there are so many kinds of adaptations depending on the habitat. We are going to talk about the adaptations in fishes. We know that fishes are aquatic animals and they have to adapt themselves to live in that environment. For us, we are living on the land and we have adaptations according to land. That means adaptations of locomotion, the way we breathe, the way we eat stuff, right? So in the same way, fishes have certain kind of adaptation which allow them to live successfully in the water. So what are those adaptations? Let's understand one by one. The very first thing which they have is the streamlined body, right? Their body is usually streamlined, spindle shaped and laterally compressed, right? They are mostly flat. Laterally compressed means they don't have a very broad body, they are flat, right? Comparatively flatter. Why? Because this helps them in swimming, right? This helps them in reducing the friction which will which they will face while swimming in the water, right? We know, like when we are walking, we don't face so much of friction because air is very, you can say it's not that dense, right? Air is not that dense, but water in comparison to air is denser. So the body needs to be streamlined so that it's easier for them to swim in the water, even if the water current is opposite to the direction they are swimming, right? So the streamlined body or the spindle shaped body helps them in swimming. Also, when their body is laterally compressed, the friction that they will face because of the water will be less, right? So this is one of the features which help them in swimming. Apart from that, fins which are present on the posterior side, right, also helps them in swimming, right? Like for example, over here they have fins. This is again a fin. These fins help them in swimming in the water, right? So they help the fish to move forward, correct? Now they have a tail, usually a muscular tail. This is called as a tail and it helps in the changing of direction. It acts as a rudder for them, which helps them in basically if they want to go left or right, the tail will help them in changing direction, right? So these three features are basically associated with the swimming part of it. You know that because they are living organisms, they need to go from one place to another in the search of food. So these three features mainly help them in the locomotion in the water, that is from one place to the other, right? Then usually their body is covered by waterproof scales and this prevents the decay that can happen because of the water, prevents decay, right? You have seen in plants the adaptation was that the plant body was covered with the waxy coating to avoid the decay of the plant body. Similarly, the fish is covered by waterproof scale which avoids decay in the animal body. We've seen that if you keep something in water for long, usually if it is not waterproof, it will start to wear off, it will start to decay. In the same way, because of the same reason, plants as well as the aquatic animals are covered with the waxy coating. In plants you see waxy coating, whereas over here they have scales which help them to become waterproof and avoid decay, right? Then in some fishes a swim bladder is present which is filled with air and maintains buoyancy, meaning that this particular fish stays up, is able to float rather, because of the swim bladder which is present inside the air, which is present inside the body of the particular fish, and it contains air, so that the fish is able to, it doesn't sink, right? Because you know that the density of a fish is more than the water, right? But because of this swim bladder that they have, which is filled with air, they become more and more buoyant, so that they are able to float properly in the water and they do not sink down, right? Then gills are present for breathing. You know that the fishes which are completely submerged in the water, they need special kind of organs for breathing the oxygen that is present, that is mixed in the water itself. So gills are present for the respiration. Unlike us, we have lungs which are suitable for breathing in the air, but fishes are provided with gills which help them in breathing properly in the water, in taking up oxygen which is dissolved in the water. So these are the few basic adaptations that we see in a fish which helps them in surviving in the aquatic system. We are going to talk about adaptations by plants and animals in the desert, that is the dry climate. We know that dry climate or desert is a terrestrial habitat. We've talked about aquatic habitat, we've talked about the animals and plants which are staying or they are living and thriving in the aquatic habitat, and what are their adaptations. We talked about frog which is living both on the land as well as in water. But from this in this session we are going to talk about typical terrestrial plant, and the habitat that we are going to focus is the desert or the hot and dry climate, or the area where there scarcity of water. So first of all, let's understand the adaptations that are seen in a cactus, which is a desert plant, right? This is a desert plant. So what are the different adaptations that we see in the this particular plant which is known as the cactus? If you start comparing, as I am teaching you this particular, I am teaching you about the adaptation of this particular plant, I would suggest that you look around and you can compare the changes that we have seen in cactus with the trees and the plants that you have around you, right? So you see that what are the changes that are happening, what are the adaptations that are there in a cactus. So we know that in a plant there are three main parts. One is the root, then you have your stem, and then you have your leaves, right? These are the main three parts of the plant, which is the body of a plant is divided into three main parts. So we see adaptations or changes or modifications in all these. So let's discuss about the changes that happen in all of them one by one. So let's start with the roots. Now the roots of this particular plants are very long, right? Why they are very long? Because there is scarcity of water, so these long roots will reach the water that is underground, that is on the water which is in the ground. It is deep seated in the ground, right? So because it is a desert environment where there is scarcity of water, what happens is that the roots are long and they grow longer into the grounds in the search of the groundwater. So wherever there is groundwater, the roots tend to move towards that water, right? So the roots are very long in the cases of cactus. Then again, let's see what are the modifications that we see in the stem. Stems become spongy so as to store water. Whatever small rainfall they receive, very small rainfall, low amount of rainfall they receive, it is stored in the stem. As you can see over here, the stem becomes spongy, right? And it contains lot of water. If you have a cactus nearby, just take a small say knife and put a small cut in it. You will see that it will ooze out some fluid, right? And that is why it is spongy, because it contains lot of water in it, because whatever little water they get from the groundwater or whenever it rains, the stem stores it inside, and that's why it is so fleshy. If you see any other plant, say for example rose, you will find that the stem is very thin. It doesn't have that kind of thick stem as you see in your cactus. Then again, stem is green and performs photosynthesis. You can see that the stem over here is green, and because it has chlorophyll, it performs photosynthesis. Why is it so? Because we will see that leaves have been reduced or has modified into spines, right? So for now, let's understand that the stem is fleshy, it has become green, and it performs photosynthesis for the plant. Now, waxy coating is present to prevent loss of water. Now, if you remember, we had waxy coating on the leaves as well, on the leaves of aquatic plants as well. That was to avoid decay, right? We did not want the plant to decay in the presence of lot of water. That is why there was waxy coating onto the plant. But in this case, waxy coating is present so as to avoid or to reduce the water that is lost due to transpiration. So because of because there is so much of heat, the plant does not want to lose water to that. So what it does, it creates a waxy coating on itself, and because of that, what happens is that the loss of water is minimized. Then again, to prevent the loss of water, the leaves are reduced to spines. Why? We know that leaves contain stomata, and because of that, whenever the stomata opens up, it loses water, right? The water goes out in the form of water vapor. So to avoid that kind of phenomena, the leaves are, they have shrunk themselves into the spines. These spines which you see on a cactus are nothing but the leaves. So we see how this particular desert plant has adapted itself in living in the dry and hot climate, right? Moving on to the animal, that is your camel. We know this camel is also known as the ship of the desert. So this is your desert animal. Alright, so let's now understand what are the changes that have happened in this animal to help it to survive in the dry and hot climate. That is, what is the adaptations that have occurred, what are the adaptations that it has acquired. Let's understand them one by one. First of all, it has long legs which help to keep the body away from the hot sand. So this is the hot sand which is there, and it has long legs, as you can see, to keep this body away from the hot sand. So as the longer the camel, the more distance it can maintain between the hot sand and the body. So what happens is this will help the body to remain cooler as compared to the sand. Then thick large sole on feet help in walking on the sand. So you can see the sole which are there are very thick. So why is that so? Because the sand is really hot and it is not that hard surface. The sand is not the hard surface. So thick and large sole will help to keep the animal or will help the animal to walk freely, right? So thick and large sole on feet help in walking in the sand, correct? So it will help them, it will protect it from the sand heat, and it will give them a better grip. Then it can drink large quantity of water. So whenever there is water available, first of all the water is scarce, but whenever it reaches an area which has a water, say it reaches a pond or a lake, it has the capacity to drink huge amount of water in one go. The camel can drink so much water. Why it does so? Because whenever the water is available, it will drink a lot of water and it will be stored in the body. So we see that in one go the camel can drink a large quantity of water. Then a camel can go on without food or water at a stretch for as long as 10 days. For 10 days the camel can move in the desert, can stay in the desert without food or water, because it usually stores everything in the body in the form of fat or in different other ways. So the camel is well adapted for the desert, because camel is a herbivorous animal and the plants are scarce in the desert because of less water. So whenever it gets the water, it drinks a lot and it eats properly. So it can store the food in the body, and that's why it can go on for 10 days, up to 10 days without water and food. Then it passes out very little urine. Again, coming back to the phenomena of losing less water, the urine which is passed out by the camel is very less in quantity because it doesn't have water in the desert. So the urine passes is very very little, because the body does not want to lose water in the form of urine. So we see there are so many different changes that are happening in the camel's body, and we see according to the desert, we see the main purpose of the body, whether it is a plant body or an animal body, is to conserve water to sustain in that kind of hot and dry climate, right? So I hope you were able to understand that what are the different kinds of adaptations an organism, be it a plant or an animal, takes up whenever it is present in such kind of a climate. We are going to talk about the adaptations that are there in the plants and animals of the mountains, that is the environment that is very cold, right? We will talk about what are the adaptations we see in the animals and in the plants. First, let's talk about the animals. If you think about it, what are the kinds of animals that you see in the mountains? You will find polar bears, right? Then you will find animals like yak, as you can see over here, this is a yak. Then you will find animals like say snow leopard, right? These are the kind of animals you usually see in the case of mountains. Now what is common between all these animals? You will find that all these animals are covered by thick fur. First thing is, now whenever you are in a very cold environment, what is the first thing that you need to do? In the cases of desert, we saw that there was a need to preserve water, but in this case there is a need to preserve what? The body heat, right? The body heat. We do not want the animal to get cold and die off because of the cold. So the first thing, which is the first adaptation that we observe just by looking at the animal, is the fur, right? The first thing which you observe is the fur. In the case of yak, you will see long hair. Now this feature, that is the fur and the long hair, protects the animal from extreme cold, right? The fur, you can see that is present in the snow leopard, and yak is usually covered by long hair, right? Apart from that, if you see in polar bear and penguin, you will find a layer of fat which is present beneath the surface of the fur. So in polar bear you have fur as well as a layer of fat, right? So this helps in preserving the body heat. Apart from that, their toes and their feet are equipped in, or they are modified in a way so that it is easy for them to walk on the rocky terrain of the your mountain, right? So in this way we see how a particular animal is adapted towards for staying in the cold environment, right? Also the feet are such so that they can walk in the rocky terrain of the environment. Then if we talk about the plants which are found in cold environments are junipers, right? Pines, right? Fir. All these are the plants which you usually find in the cold environment in the mountains. The first thing which you observe is their structure. Now if you see the structure of these plants, how it is, it's in the form of a cone, because this particular form helps them to get rid of the ice. So we know that on the mountains there is snowfall. So if the plant is completely covered with snow, what will happen? It will not be able to get do photosynthesis. This plant will not get enough sunlight for photosynthesis. But because of their cone shape, what happens when the ice falls on them? It will slide off onto the ground. So this is, what will happen? This plant will be saved from the frost, right? Also if the ice stays for longer period of time on the plant, it will damage the plant. So these plants have cone shaped structure so that the this snow falls off down onto the ground. Apart from that, the leaves of these plants are needle shaped, right? So again the reason is the same why they are needle shaped, so that if suppose they are flat shaped like this, maybe in the case of say neem, or you can say in the case of people, if the shape of the leaf is flat, what will happen? The snow will stay onto the leaf for a longer period of time. But if it is needle shaped, what will happen? The snow will not be able to stay on the leaf, right? So these are the, you can say, the adaptations that we see in the plant and animals whenever we are talking about the habitat of the mountain. Then moving on, let's understand the adaptations which are there in the animals which are usually airborne, the animals which are usually in the air, and those animals are birds, right? We know that birds are airborne, they survive in the air. How they survive in the air is because they hunt in the air, where they are usually scouting for food whenever they are in the air. Let's understand what are the different adaptations in the birds which allow them to stay in the air and take a flight. The first thing which we notice in a bird, whenever I say a bird, the first thing which comes to the mind is wings. What are these wings? These wings are nothing but four limbs which are modified in the form of wings which help them to fly, right? So this particular wing which we see, the pair of wing which we see, are nothing but the pair of four limbs which have been modified in the form of wings, and they are covered with feathers. Feathers, again, like I said, helps in flight and insulating the body. So the temperature is controlled by the feathers. So the body of this particular animal, the bird, is kept warm because of the feather. Apart from that, it also helps in the flight. How does it help in the flight? They trap air. The feather usually trap air in between them, keeping the animal lightweight. Apart from that, in helping or to help in the flight of a bird, the bones are hollow and filled with air cavities. Again, if you remember, in the case of fishes, we saw there was a swim bladder which was filled with air, and that kept the fish buoyant. In the same way, the birds have bones which are hollow, which makes them light. The birds are usually lighter. And what else? They are filled with air cavities. Again, the reason of the same is to create a light bodied animal, right? And because of this reason, they can easily fly, and they are easily airborne, right? So we see how there are different kinds of adaptations which help a particular bird in flying. Then body is streamlined. Again, the reason is to reduce friction, to make their flight more smooth. Their body is streamlined, right? Although they face less this friction as compared to the fish, but still, whenever they are airborne, they are at some height, and at that point of time, they need a streamlined body so as to cut off the friction which they receive because of the air currents, right? Apart from that, lungs are provided with air sacs. This again helps in keeping the body light, right? This air sac will, we have seen how many, this bones, then your feathers, and so many other things are there which is helping a particular animal, that is your bird, in keeping, in allowing them to take a flight, in allowing them to fly. So lungs are again filled with the air sacs so as to keep the body lighter. Then flight muscles are present. These muscles are really strong in a bird. These are present in the wings, and they help in the flight of the bird, because the muscle has to carry the bird in the air. That is why these are very, very strong muscles that are present in the bird. So these are the different kinds of adaptations which are present in a bird and helps them in flight. Now let's understand how particular birds fly. Now let's understand the flight in the bird. So first thing which is there, which helps the bird to fly, like I said, is the soft body, is the light body. Then birds are adapted to fly because of the wings, and they have legs so that they can walk on the ground as well. So if you see, they have a pair of hind limbs which are in the form of leg, which help them to walk around. So birds can fly as well as they can walk, right? There are some birds which are flightless. For example, your ostrich and emu, they are very heavy. The reason is they are very heavy, although they also have wings, but those wings are not enough to carry the body weight, right? And they have legs, so they are good runners. Usually ostrich is a very good runner. So in the same way, the legs of the bird allows them to walk, and the wings allow them to fly. Apart from that, the birds like your duck and swan have what? They have webbed feet, right? And these webbed feet allow them to swim. They have webbed feet, and this allow them to swim. These are the birds which are usually seen in your water. It's not like they cannot fly, they do have wing and they can fly to a certain distance, but these usually are found in the water. You will find them swimming on the surface of the water. They do not go inside the water, but definitely they are swimming on the surface of the water, and that's where they catch their prey. So they have webbed feet which helps them in pushing forward in the water, or rather swimming in the water. Apart from that, like I have already told you, the body of the bird is streamlined and it is light, which helps them in flight. Then the forelimbs are converted into wings. Then they have breast muscles, which are really strong muscles which help them to fly. These muscles are attached to the wings and it helps in the pushing and pulling of the wings. You must have seen when the bird flies, it pushes the wing down and pulls it up, and that's how the bird takes a flight. So this breast muscle, it helps in this function, and this function goes on until the bird is flying, right? So these muscles ought to be really strong. So they have very strong breast muscles which are attached to the wing and are associated with the pushing and pulling of the wings, and thus keeping the bird in flight. So in this way we have seen how there are different kinds of modifications which are present in a bird, which helps them to adapt in different kinds of environment, be it you're flying, be it in the water, and so on and so forth. We have seen what do we understand by habitat and what are the different adaptations in plant as well as in animals depending on the habitat they are in. I hope you were able to understand this chapter and you will be able to see the adaptations which are there in the animals and the plants around you. Thank you.